On November 22, 1997, the world woke up to the news that Michael Hutchence, the golden-voiced frontman of INXS, had taken his own life in a Sydney hotel room at just 37 years old. For years, the story stayed simple. Rock star, too much pressure, tragic ending. But what if everything we thought we knew was wrong? What if the real reason he slipped away had nothing to do with the wild lifestyle, the tabloids, or even the heartbreak everyone pointed to? What if one brutal moment 5 years earlier, a moment kept secret for decades by the woman who loved him most, actually rewired his brain and set him on a path he could never come back from? Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the night that changed Michael forever, the revelation Helena Christensen finally shared with the world, and why some of the people closest to him still refuse to accept the official story. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll never hear an INXS song the same way again. A skinny teenager with cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, standing on a Sydney stage in 1977, screaming into a microphone while the crowd loses its mind. That was Michael Hutchence at 17, already magnetic, already dangerous. INXS started as 6 mates messing around in pubs, but by the early 80s, they owned the world. Albums like Shaboo Shuba, The Swing, and then The Monster Kick in 1987 turned them into stadium gods almost overnight. Need You Tonight wasn't just a #1 hit, it was the sexiest 4 minutes rock radio had ever played, and Michael was the living embodiment of it. Shirt half open, hips moving like liquid, that half smirk that made you feel personally invited to the after-party. But behind the swagger was a kid who'd already been through more than most adults ever face. When he was 4, his parents split, and his mother took him and his little brother Rhett to live in Hong Kong while their dad stayed in Australia. For years, the brothers barely saw each other. Michael later said it felt like part of him had been ripped away. He learned early how to charm his way out of pain, how to turn loneliness into charisma. By the time he was dating Kylie Minogue in the late 80s, the golden couple of pop and rock, he was untouchable. Private jets, red carpets, screaming girls throwing hotel keys. To the outside world, he had it all. What nobody saw was that underneath the leather pants and the eyeliner, Michael was already carrying cracks nobody knew about. Cracks that were about to get a whole lot wider. And when the brightest spotlight finally found him, something darker was waiting in the wings. In 1991, Michael walked into a Copenhagen bar and locked eyes with Helena Christensen across the room. She was 22, already one of the biggest supermodels on the planet, the face of Chanel, the girl in Chris Isaac's Wicked Game video that made jaws drop worldwide. He was 31, the rock star every woman wanted and every guy wanted to be. The chemistry was instant and explosive. Helena later said it was total mental and physical chemistry, the kind you feel in your bones. For the next 4 years, they were inseparable. Paris fashion weeks, secret getaways in the south of France, motorbikes through Italy, laughing on yachts while paparazzi tried to keep up. Friends described them as the most beautiful couple you'd ever seen, both tall, both golden, both radiating this effortless cool that made normal people feel underdressed just standing near them. Michael called her his Danish pastry, sent her handwritten love letters that she still keeps in a box. Helena saw a side of him the stage lights never caught. The guy who read poetry in bed, who cried at old movies, who talked for hours about wanting a simple life one day with kids running around barefoot. She said he was joyful, sweet, deep, emotional, everything the tabloids never bothered to print because it didn't sell papers. They fought, like any couple, sure, but they made up fast and loud. Helena later admitted she'd never felt anything close to that intensity before or since. For a while, it looked like they might actually make it, that Michael had finally found the one person who could match his fire without getting burned. They were the 90s ultimate fantasy couple, untouchable, unstoppable. But one ordinary night in the summer of 1992, everything they had was about to be smashed into the pavement, literally. and Michael made Helena promise never to tell a soul what really happened next. It was August 1992, a warm night in Copenhagen. Michael and Helena were riding bikes back to their hotel after grabbing pizza, laughing, carefree, the way only people madly in love can be at 2 in the morning. They stopped on a quiet street to finish eating. A taxi pulled up behind them. The driver, impatient, honking. Words were exchanged. Michael, never one to back down, told the guy to relax. That's when the taxi driver got out and punched Michael square in the face with everything he had. Helena watched in slow-motion horror as Michael flew backward, his head cracking against the curb with a sickening thud. He dropped like a light going out. Blood poured from his mouth and ear. She screamed his name, knelt beside him, felt for a pulse. Nothing moved. She truly believed, in that moment, that the love of her life had just been murdered in front of her. People on the street froze. Someone called an ambulance. Helena cradled his head, begging him to stay with her, smearing blood across her hands and dress. When the paramedics arrived, Michael suddenly gasped back to life. At the hospital, he woke up swinging, furious, confused, ripping out IV lines, shoving doctors away. Helena said he was like a different person, eyes wild, voice booming, demanding to leave. The doctors wanted scans, wanted to keep him for observation. Michael refused everything. He grabbed Helena's arm and growled, "Get me out of here, now!" Against every medical warning, she helped him walk out. Weeks later, in Paris, a specialist finally examined him. The verdict was devastating. Fractured skull, bleeding on the brain, permanent damage to the frontal lobes. Worst of all, he had completely lost his sense of smell and most of his taste, something that crushed him far more than people realized. One night he broke down in Helena's arms and sobbed, "When I have children, I'll never be able to smell my baby." Then he made her swear, right there in that darkened room, that she would never tell anyone what really happened. Not the band, not his family, nobody. His image was everything. The sexy, fearless frontman. Brain damage didn't fit the brand. So Helena locked the secret away for 27 years, and in the months that followed, the man she loved started slipping away from her, one terrifying piece at a time. At first, everyone chalked it up to the usual rock star chaos, late nights, too much champagne, the pressure of keeping INXS relevant after the 90s grunge wave hit. But Helena saw the difference up close, and it terrified her. The gentle guy who used to read her Neruda poems in bed was disappearing. In his place was someone quicker to anger, darker in mood, almost reckless with his own safety. Friends noticed it too. One minute he'd be the life of the party, the next he'd explode over nothing and storm out. Bandmates started calling it the switch. When it flipped, you just got out of the way. The loss of smell and taste hit him harder than anyone understood. Food became texture only. Wine, perfume, the ocean, everything he loved turned flat. He told close friends it felt like living in a world wrapped in plastic. To dull the emptiness, he leaned harder into cocaine and ecstasy, anything that still gave a rush. The same brain injury that stole his senses also shredded his impulse control. Doctors today say frontal lobe damage can turn the most even-tempered person into a stranger. Mood swings, aggression, poor judgment, even a craving for danger, because normal thrills don't register anymore. Michael started skydiving without lessons, riding motorcycles at insane speeds, picking fights in bars just to feel something. Helena tried everything to reach him. She begged him to see specialists, to slow down, to let people in. But he'd just smile that heartbreaking half smile and say, "I'm fine, baby. This is just who I am now." By 1995, the fights were constant. She'd find him at 4 in the morning, pacing the apartment, chain-smoking, eyes black with rage at nothing and everything. One night, he put his fist through a wall because the remote control wasn't where he left it. Helena knew the relationship was killing them both. When they finally split, it wasn't because the love died, it was because she couldn't watch him destroy himself anymore.
He promised to read Get Help. He promised a lot of people that.
Instead, 6 months later, he walked straight into the most toxic storm of his life, and the tabloids were waiting with open arms. In early 1995, Michael flew to London for the Brit Awards and met Paula Yates backstage. She was married to Bob Geldof, the saintly face of Live Aid, mother of 3 little girls, and the most infamous TV interviewer in Britain. What started as a flirtation detonated into full-blown obsession within weeks. Paula left Geldof, took the kids, and by Christmas, she and Michael were living together in the south of France, paparazzi helicopters buzzing overhead like vultures. The British press needed a villain, and they crowned Michael instantly. Overnight, he went from sexy rock god to homewrecker, drug fiend, and the man who stole St. Bob's wife. Front pages screamed about cocaine parties, screamed that he was an unfit influence on Paula's daughters. Every time he stepped outside, cameras followed him like a swarm. His sister Tina later said Michael would read the headlines and just laugh at first. Then the laugh would die, and he'd sit in silence for hours. In July 1996, Paula gave birth to their daughter, Heavenly Hirani Tiger Lily. Michael was over the moon. He carried photos everywhere, told everyone this little girl was the reason he had to stay alive, but the custody war with Geldof turned vicious. Bob wanted the older girls kept away from Michael entirely. Court dates piled up, lawyers drained millions, and every hearing became fresh meat for the tabloids. Michael's phone was hacked, his trash stolen. Strangers shouted, "Baby snatcher," when he walked down the street. The stress fed the injury inside his head. Friends saw the rages getting worse. One night, in 1997, he smashed up a hotel room so badly that police were called. Another time, he punched a paparazzo and ended up in court. Paula, battling her own demons, told friends Michael would cry in the middle of the night, saying he couldn't feel joy anymore, that everything tasted like ash. He started mixing prescription pills with whatever else he could find, just to quiet the noise in his skull. By November 1997, he was barely sleeping. Tiger Lily was 15 months old and living in London with Paula while the courts decided visitation. Michael was in Australia, rehearsing for what was supposed to be INXS's big comeback tour. Phone calls between him and Paula became screaming matches about money, lawyers, and when he could see his daughter. On the night of November 21st, he left a series of frantic voicemails. One to his manager, begging to cancel the tour. One to Paula, pleading to bring Tiger Lily to Sydney. One to a friend saying he didn't think he could go on. And 24 hours later, a maid found him in room 524 of the Ritz-Carlton Double Bay. But what the autopsy revealed next would make people question everything they've been told for years. November 22, 1997. Housekeeping knocked on the door of Suite 524 at the Ritz-Carlton in Sydney. No answer. When they used their key, they found Michael Hutchence on his knees, a leather belt around his neck, the other end fastened to the top of the wardrobe door. He was 37 years old, barefoot, wearing only jeans. There was no note. The official coroner's report, released a few weeks later, was blunt. He had taken his own life while depressed and under the influence of alcohol, cocaine, Prozac, and other prescription drugs. Case closed. Except it never felt closed to the people who actually knew him. Paula Yates flew to Sydney and refused to accept the verdict. She told anyone who would listen, Michael would never have left Tiger Lily. The coroner didn't know him. I knew him. She pushed the autoerotic asphyxiation theory hard, claiming it had been an accident during a private moment gone wrong. The tabloids ran with that version for years because it sold more papers than simple heartbreak ever could. What almost nobody mentioned at the time was the second half of the autopsy report. Buried in the medical language were 2 words that changed everything: extensive contusions and old hemorrhagic areas across both frontal lobes. In plain English, large sections of Michael's brain had been scarred and dead for years, exactly the kind of damage you get when your skull hits concrete at full force. The same injury from Copenhagen 5 years earlier that Helena had been sworn to keep secret. Modern neurologists who have studied the files say the damage was in the worst possible place, the part that controls impulse, emotion, and risk assessment. One expert told the makers of the documentary Mystify that people with that exact injury profile often appear totally normal for years. Then one day the wiring just shorts out. Add chronic pain, sleep deprivation, cocaine, and the kind of stress that would break anyone, and you have a perfect storm. Michael's brother Rhett later said, "If we'd known about the head injury back then, we would have dragged him to doctors, locked him in rehab, done anything. Instead, we just thought he was being Michael, the wild one." Paula died 3 years later of an accidental overdose, still insisting it wasn't suicide. Tiger Lily was orphaned at 4. For 2 decades, the world moved on, and the secret stayed buried with the people who loved him most. Until one woman finally decided 27 years of silence was enough. In 2019, a documentary called Mystify, Michael Hutchence, quietly premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and then landed on BBC Two. It wasn't another glossy rock biography full of talking heads praising his genius. This one was different. Director Richard Lowenstein had been INXS's longtime video collaborator, the guy who shot Need You Tonight and Never Tear Us Apart. And he had boxes of unseen Super 8 footage Michael himself filmed, home movies, backstage moments, love letters read aloud in Michael's own voice. The film stitched it all together with brand new interviews from Kylie Minogue, Bono, his siblings, bandmates, and, for the first time ever, Helena Christensen. Helena sat in a softly lit room and finally told the full Copenhagen story on camera. She cried, remembering the blood, the hospital, the promise she kept for 27 years. She said she only broke the silence because she was tired of the world remembering Michael as that guy who died doing something kinky, instead of the brilliant, broken man she loved. The film ends with her voice cracking. Something drastic happened to him that night. He was never the same again. When Mystify came out, it felt like a dam breaking. Critics called it one of the most heartbreaking music documentaries ever made. Fans who grew up thinking they knew the whole story suddenly realized they'd missed the biggest piece. For the first time, the brain injury was front and center, backed by medical experts explaining exactly how frontal lobe trauma can make someone look reckless and self-destructive when they're actually fighting a physical wound nobody can see. But not everyone welcomed the revelation. In 2022, on the 25th anniversary of his death, Michael's younger sister Tina gave an explosive interview to the Sun newspaper. She accused Helena of keeping the family in the dark for decades, saying, "If we'd known the truth back then, maybe we could have done something. Maybe he'd still be here." Tina claimed the secrecy fed years of ugly rumors and left the family defending a version of events they didn't fully understand. Helena responded the only way she ever does. She posted a black-and-white throwback photo of her and Michael laughing on a boat, captioned simply, "Forever wrapped in the magical light around you." No anger, no rebuttal, just love. The debate blew up across social media. Some fans sided with Tina. The truth should have come out sooner. Others defended Helena. Michael begged her to stay quiet to protect his image, and she honored that promise as long as he was the one being hurt by the silence. After he was gone, she finally spoke when she felt the world was ready to listen. Today, 28 years later, Tiger Lily is 29, living quietly in Australia, reportedly never selling her story. The missing millions from Michael's estate are still tied up in offshore trusts nobody can fully trace. INXS's music streams bigger than ever on Spotify, introducing Never Tear Us Apart to a whole new generation who think it's just a wedding song, never knowing the real tears behind it. And every November 22nd, Helena still posts the same simple tribute, a single candle emoji and the words, "I remember." No hashtags, no drama. Just a woman who kept a promise longer than most marriages last,
and finally set the truth free when she thought her lover's legacy deserved it. So where does that leave the rest of us?
So was it really suicide? Was it the final snap of a brain that had been bleeding silently for 5 years? Or was it simply a perfect storm of tabloid cruelty, custody heartbreak, and a man who couldn't smell his own baby's skin anymore? Maybe the answer is all of it, and none of it. Maybe the real tragedy isn't how Michael Hutchence left this world, but how hard he fought to stay in it, while everything inside his head was quietly breaking. Helena Christensen once said, "He was the brightest light, and then someone turned the switch off." Mystify didn't give us a neat bow. It gave us the missing chapter we never knew we were missing. And 28 years later, that chapter is still rewriting the story every time a new kid discovers Need You Tonight and wonders why the singer's eyes look so haunted in the video. Next time you hear that opening guitar riff, remember the night in Copenhagen. Remember the promise. Remember the man who smiled for the cameras while half his future was already bleeding out on a Danish sidewalk. If this story hit you the way it still hits the people who loved him, do me a favor. Drop a comment below and tell me which INXS song you're playing first after this. Hit that like button if you think Michael deserved better than the headlines he got. And subscribe to Retro Celeb Talk so we can keep digging up the real stories behind the legends the world tried to forget. Turn on notifications, because next week we're diving into another icon whose ending still doesn't add up. Thanks for staying till the end. Michael, wherever you are, we finally smell the flowers. See you in the next one.